Hey guys, Justin with Deep Dive Stocks here, and today we're going to be doing a data dive into CHWY. Let's go ahead and get started. So I've always kind of just kept an eye on CHWY, just because of its association with GME. I thought honestly, there's no real reason. I just keep an eye on it. So I figured I would just finally do a video on it and look at the current state of events for CHWY. And I guess in a nutshell, not that good, right? So we're going to start with VoEx graph. The VoEx graph, if you haven't, definitely take a look at the other videos on my channel about VoEx. They just go over what VoEx is, what it measures, how to interpret it. But the main take-home points are if VoEx is inside of these two horizontal lines, we typically consider a stock stable. If VoEx is above in the inhibition zone or below in the propagation zone, we consider the stock to be unstable. And so right off the bat, we can see that CHWY is pretty consistently unstable, right? What's interesting, I want to go look to see into some of the inner workings here, but this huge drop in price like barely budged to VoEx, but maybe that's a video for another time. But we can see the VoEx inside of the inhibition zone during price appreciations in June, July of 2021. This is telling us that the market was not all that pleased with these price appreciations and that there was a lot of inhibitory pressure. So without fail, VoEx plummeted back into the propagation zone in September of 2021, which is a pretty characteristic outcome in these persistently elevated states. And since then, CHWY has fallen quite significantly. Now, this little bump up isn't VoEx rising into stability, right? Like VoEx climbing, that's almost like in the span of 2 weeks, no, 1 week. VoEx rising from deep into the propagation zone to deep in the inhibition zone is indicative of, and also notice that it happened the moment the price stopped depreciating, right? So that says the moment the price stopped going down, VoEx rose pretty drastically into the inhibition zone. So this price appreciation was again being met with overly inhibitory pressure with these, especially like look at these consistent VoEx spikes into the inhibition zone. So during this period in time of October to November of 2021, one day I'll learn my months, that's telling us that price appreciation was not being well tolerated. And just like in September of 2021, VoEx once again slammed back into the propagation zone and the price has fallen since. Pretty classic VoEx behavior on I should say classic in the sense that this is a pretty wildly turbulent stock. But the take-home points are, at least in the ending of last year, there was an attempt to rise the price, which was met with inhibitory pressure that was worked against, and the price has kind of really traveled along the same path that it was put on as indicated by VoEx in September of 2021 and moving towards the present. So the idea being, again, this is kind of just a gauge of like, I always think that sometimes the stock will test like going back up, and this kind of tells us that or VoEx is telling us really that this test failed, that the stock was not ready to rise back in price. And with VoEx deepening, it seems we have the VoEx trend line is progressing deeper into the propagation zone. This tells us again that persistent and continued declines in price are the most likely outcome. It isn't too uncommon to see these tests of these little tests that the stocks will do, but you don't want to see, the ideal is that during these tests, you don't want to see drastic VoEx movement, like slamming into the inhibition zone, right? The idea would be for VoEx to kind of migrate into stability while the price appreciates. And that would tell us that that appreciation in price is being well tolerated by the market. But we see here that that's not the case, or it wasn't the case in end of 2021. And with VoEx deepening into the propagation zone, it seems like continued declines in price is the most probable outcome. We can then move to the snap graphs. So the snap graphs take VoEx's behavior, churn it through the snap algorithm, and just gives us a up or down prediction based off of previous VoEx and price action relationship. The 20-day snap return is 1 month, or 10 days, these are trading days, so 2 weeks, and then 5 days 1 week, and then 1 day is obviously on Monday. We see, in order to interpret the snap graphs, we just have to look to see where the crosshairs are. So if they are below the gold line, then that's negative anticipated returns. And so we see negative anticipated returns on the 1 month, 2 week, 1 week, and the 1 day. So it seems like the snap algorithm agrees with our assessment of VoEx that negative returns are indeed the most likely outcome. What's interesting, so before I get ahead of myself, then we can move to the hedging heat map. The hedging heat map is a new addition to the deep dive stock reports, and I think they're very cool. The idea is that it takes all of the hedging requirements on a stock and it maps them out. So it tells us how those hedging requirements will change depending on volatility, or changes in volatility, or changes in the price, with the crosshairs indicating the current position that CHWY finds itself in. What is interesting about CHWY is that there's little to no white space, and that white space is gamma neutral. And almost all stocks will present, there's two, and well, sorry, I train of thought sometimes, right, just immediately derails. So there's no white space, that means there's no gamma neutral, which is odd because most stocks almost always have a gamma neutral, and we can in fact see in the distribution that we have little to none, right? So on top of that, so typically a stock will want to stay inside of this gamma neutral zone. And if you haven't, I would definitely recommend checking out some of the other data dives on some other stocks, just to see what I mean with this, these hedging heat maps. So but the problem is, without that white zone, there's this constant tug and pull from the selling pressure, which is the red. So that indicates that the selling would have to increase if the price or volatility moved. The numbers indicate that that selling pressure can get pretty significant. And then there's purchasing support above. And again, so the deeper the blue, the more purchasing support increases. And then the numbers indicate some pretty severe purchasing support. And typically two things. One, a stable hedging heat map will have selling on the top and purchasing on the bottom. And this provides like a nice gradual kind of like updraft provided by the options, where at any time the stock kind of falls a little bit, the purchasing support comes and boosts it up. And then typically you want that purchasing support to be in greater magnitude, kind of like it is here. We see that there's a lot of purchasing support, more than the selling support. But ideally, we would want these two roles reversed, because the problem is that both without having a gamma neutral space and with having such pretty potent selling pressure located anytime the stock price falls, it has a propensity to create this positive feedback loop where, as the price falls, there's more selling pressure, and then more selling pressure, which causes more selling, which causes more selling pressure, so on and so forth. And if this is ringing any bells for anyone, it should, because it is a gamma squeeze. So CHWY is inside of a gamma squeeze, and this one is pretty pronounced, because I mean, there's no space for CHWY to go that isn't going to be affected by this gamma squeeze. And since we already saw from VoEx that the most likely outcome, VoEx and the snap graphs, right, that the most likely outcome is down, this tells us that we are either in, if we looked at the previous hedging heat maps, we could figure that out, but we're either already in this positive feedback loop, or we are absolutely about to enter one, which is going to cause just this persistent declines in price, almost like what VoEx told us. How cool, huh? Moving on, we see the expected price range graph. The dashed lines indicate the 68% probability movement for a stock. And the expected price range graph is just good so we can figure out how like well behaved a stock is. So ideally you want the price to really stay inside these dashed lines as much as possible. And we see that CHWY is almost incapable of ever staying inside of the market's expectations, which is going to be good to know when we kind of plan ahead and try to figure out how we're going to position ourselves and what our risk tolerance should be, right? So for instance, if we positioned ourselves for downside throughout this whole thing, and say we got greedy and we didn't realize our gains, and we started experiencing 1 or 2 days of price appreciation, Well, the expected price range graph is going to tell us that the market is going to move more than, or the stock is going to move more than the market expects. So get out, right? Like you don't have a lot of playroom here. The price on CHWY is either going to slam down to the ground or it's going to slam up. And I mean, it's just chaotic price movement, really. It's a pretty unstable stock, which VoEx, I guess, was telling us. But it's honestly, this is a pretty impressively defiant price action in terms of the market's expectations. Shorting on CHWY, just been consistently increasing, but nothing to like write home about, really. The options layout is, so on the left we have the current options layout, how the options are currently placed. On the right we have the change in the options layout. The bars indicate the change in the percent difference in the open interest of those options from the day prior, and then these squiggly lines indicate the average daily change for the past month. Obviously these squiggly lines are dwarfed a little bit because it seems like there is like a 600% difference in puts at the money puts on Thursday, with Thursday like the end of the weeklies. I don't know if CHWY has weeklies though. I'd have to look that up. So the take home point here is that there's been quite a significant closure of options, especially on the put side, with Thursday's price action. And then the current options layout is pretty not okay. So ideally we would want a good amount of, so there's like no in the money calls, which is slightly concerning. There is like, it's almost like an inverted options layout, right? So ideally we would want a lot of out of the money puts, very few in the money puts. We would want a good amount of in the money calls, and probably like an equal normal distribution of calls. But in reality, we have a vast majority of calls are out of the money and a vast majority of the puts are in the money. And again, this is just kind of inverted from a standard options layout, or the options layout that would be considered stabilizing on a stock. And so probably another reason why both the price action constantly is deviant from the market's expectations. I would imagine a little part of this has to do with the types of both the arrangement of the options and the types of options here on the stock, which we'll look at below. And then we see, so take home point here is the options themselves are both destabilizing in terms of their directionality, so dealer short, dealer long, and we can glance that because of the gamma squeeze, which it looks like the gamma squeeze has been going on for at least a month, right? So our average delta is negative 38,000 for the entire month. But so not only is it the type of options, but also just the morphology of the options layout itself seems to be pretty destabilizing. And again, we can see here that part of this destabilization is one of the things, I'm kind of jumping around here. I apologize if this is kind of new material for some, but dealer long out of the money puts are particularly destabilizing. Dealer long puts are kind of destabilizing regardless if they're in the money or out of the money, but we do see we have a majority of the out of the money puts are dealer long, which isn't all that good. And we have that those out of the money calls, which isn't that many, only 50,000, but the majority of them are also dealer short. So that's your short delta, probably provoking your gamma squeeze. Excuse me. And honestly, not that many in the money calls, like we said. And then the otherwise good, right? So it's really these out of the money options, and it looks like the dealer long puts are both destabilizing in terms of how they affect volatility, and they provide negative delta to the stock, which is part of the reason CHWY is probably in a gamma squeeze. And then again, these dealer short calls also provide negative delta, also provoking the gamma squeeze. So these two alone seem to be the main culprits here. And we can actually see the effects of the dealer long puts a little bit, maybe. Let's see. Not really. So the dealer long puts are notorious for increasing volatility, but for what it's worth, CHWY has a pretty reasonable volatility. So maybe they're located a little upstream where they're not really affecting the volatility that much. But that is CHWY in a nutshell. pretty unstable right now, right? So VoEx is in the propagation zone. We see that the last kind of like quote unquote test for the price appreciation back in the end of 2021 was met with some pretty drastic inhibitory signaling from VoEx. It is now deepening into the propagation zone, so that alone has some negative price action connotations. The all four snap grabs have negative returns. It has a wildly unstable hedging heat map, and it is also an A gamma squeeze. So at the take home point for CHWY is looks like downwards. Yeah, I don't think there's much else to add. I hope you guys enjoyed. This has been a data dive on CHWY. I'm Justin with Deep Dive Stocks. If you like these kind of data analysis, let me know. I enjoy doing them, and if you have any that you want me to go over, let me know. And yeah, like, comment, subscribe, and do all that fun stuff for me. Let me know that you guys enjoy the channel, and I'll see you guys next time. Happy trading. Bye.